Today we're diving into Tiny Habits, the Small Changes That Change Everything by BJ Fogg. Have you ever felt frustrated with yourself for not sticking to good habits? Do you find yourself starting fresh over and over only to give up before seeing real progress? If so, you're not alone. Most people struggle with building habits, not because they lack discipline, but because they are using the wrong approach. What if I told you that you don't need extreme willpower, motivation, or drastic lifestyle changes to form good habits? That the secret to success lies in something so small and effortless that it almost feels too easy? The truth is, the biggest transformations come from the tiniest actions. Habits are the invisible forces shaping our daily lives. Whether we realize it or not, they dictate how we spend our time, how productive we are, and ultimately, how successful we become. But most people focus on big, overwhelming changes and set themselves up for failure. Instead, what if you could create habits that feel so easy and natural that you barely even notice you're building them? This summary will break down BJ Fogg's proven tiny habits method, showing you how small actions, when done consistently, can lead to massive personal growth. You'll discover the 3 core elements of behavior and how to use them to design habits that stick effortlessly. By the end of this summary, you'll understand why willpower alone isn't enough, and why starting small is the key to lasting change. If you're ready to take control of your habits and transform your life, one tiny step at a time, then stick with us until the end. Let's get started. The elements of behavior. We all know that changing our behavior leads to habit formation, but simply knowing this isn't enough. Real change happens only when we understand how behavior works at its core. If you don't fully grasp the mechanics behind it, any attempt to change will feel like an uphill battle. Before trying to transform your habits, you must first understand behavior itself. What drives it? What triggers it? How can you design it in a way that serves you? While most people have a general idea of how behavior works, few understand the deeper elements that shape it. BJ Fogg, the author of Tiny Habits, introduced the Fogg behavior model, which breaks behavior down into 3 essential components: motivation, ability, and prompt, or simply B equals M-A-P. In this model, B stands for behavior, while M, A, and P represent the 3 key factors that determine whether a behavior will occur. For a habit to form, all 3 elements must align. If even one is missing, action becomes difficult. Let's look at a real-life example to see how this works. One day, BJ Fogg was finishing his workout at the gym when he received a text message from the Red Cross asking if he would be willing to donate blood. Without hesitation, he agreed and responded with a yes. Why did Fogg make this decision so quickly? Because all 3 elements of behavior were present. First, his motivation was high. He had been following news about the devastating earthquake in Haiti in 2010 and deeply wanted to help. The disaster had created an emotional urgency that made him eager to contribute. Second, his ability to take action was also high. His phone was right there with him, and responding to the message required little effort. If the Red Cross had instead asked him to visit their website and enter his credit card details, he might have hesitated, not due to a lack of motivation, but because the process would have been inconvenient. His wallet was in his car, and he would have had to leave the gym, retrieve it, and then go through multiple steps to donate. That small inconvenience might have been enough to stop him. Finally, he received a prompt at exactly the right moment. The text message served as an immediate cue to take action. If the Red Cross had sent an email instead, he might have ignored it for days or never seen it at all. but because the message appeared right in front of him when he was already in a receptive state, he acted without delay. This example highlights a crucial insight. Motivation and ability are always present to some degree, but action often depends on the right prompt. Without a prompt, even the strongest motivation and easiest ability won't necessarily lead to action. Another key takeaway is that motivation and ability influence each other. When something is easy to do, you don't need much motivation. But when something is difficult, motivation must be high to compensate. The harder the task, the more motivation is required to push through. Understanding this model allows you to shape your habits in two ways. To build good habits, introduce a strong and timely prompt that triggers action. To break bad habits, remove the prompt that leads to undesired behavior. Every behavior follows the same pattern. It doesn't matter whether it's a good or bad habit, each one relies on motivation, ability, and a prompt. If you want to establish a positive habit, focus on making it easy and rewarding. The more you do something, the easier it becomes, and over time, it turns into second nature. But if you're trying to eliminate a bad habit, don't rely solely on willpower. Instead, remove the triggers that make it easy to fall back into old patterns. By cutting off the cues that prompt negative behavior, you naturally reduce the chances of repeating it, without the need for constant self-control. To apply the Fogg behavior model in your own life, try these two simple steps. 1. Identify and write down the habits you want to eliminate. Bringing awareness to your behaviors is the first step toward change. 2. Teach someone else about the model. The best way to internalize knowledge is to share it with others. When you explain something, you reinforce your own understanding and make it more real in your daily life. By understanding behavior at its core, you gain the power to shape it. Whether you want to start a new habit or break an old one, the key lies in designing your environment and using the right prompts. Motivation. Focus on matching. Let's start with a story. Sandra and Adrian had just gotten married. As a newlywed couple, their first goal was to buy their own home. After visiting several properties, they finally found the perfect house. It was small, yet comfortable, with everything they had dreamed of. However, there was one problem. The backyard was in terrible shape and would require a lot of work to clean up. But instead of being discouraged, Sandra and Adrian felt even more motivated. They saw potential in the house and were excited to make it their own. After a few discussions, they sealed the deal and began renovating the interior, focusing on the kitchen and living room. However, after weeks of renovations, their energy began to fade. They were no longer as enthusiastic as they were at the start. By the time they finished the interior, one task remained: cleaning the backyard. But now, exhaustion had set in, and doubts started creeping in. Had they made the right decision in buying this house? This is a classic example of what happens when people rely too much on motivation. At the beginning of any new endeavor, motivation runs high, but over time it fluctuates, and if we don't account for that, we struggle to stay consistent. Sandra and Adrian never considered whether they had the skills or ability to transform the backyard. When they first saw the house, they were driven by excitement, but they didn't think ahead. If they had taken a more logical approach, they would have realized that motivation alone wasn't enough. So, what exactly is motivation, and how does it influence us? Simply put, motivation is the desire to complete a task. It's the reason behind everything we do. Without it, we wouldn't take action. People are typically motivated by three main factors. 1. Personal desire. things they genuinely enjoy doing. A great example of this is a hobby. You don't force yourself to engage in a hobby. You do it because you love it. The more enjoyable something is, the more likely you are to keep doing it. 2. Consequences. The outcomes of their actions, whether positive or negative. For example, no one particularly enjoys paying taxes, but they do it to avoid penalties. Fear of consequences can be a strong motivator. 3. Environment. The influence of surroundings and social expectations. People tend to follow what they see around them. Imagine attending a charity auction where people are donating large sums of money. Seeing others contribute might inspire you to participate as well. The biggest problem with motivation is that it's unstable. It fluctuates over time. You can't always rely on it, and when it fades, so does your commitment to an activity. This is why people often struggle to keep up with their New Year's resolutions. At the start, motivation is high, but as the excitement wears off, so does their commitment. When building small habits, you need to move beyond motivation. Instead of relying on short-term enthusiasm, use motivation as a kickstarter for creating sustainable routines. To overcome the trap of false motivation, follow these 3 steps. 1. Set clear goals. Having a well-defined objective helps eliminate distractions. Sometimes, people get motivated not because they truly want something, but because they believe it will make them feel better. However, without clear goals, they often waste time on things that don't bring lasting fulfillment. When you define exactly what you want, you use your time more effectively. 2. Explore multiple options. Once you have a clear goal, look at different ways to achieve it. For example, if your goal is to lose weight, don't just focus on exercise. Consider eating a healthier diet or tracking your calorie intake. Having multiple approaches gives you flexibility and prevents frustration if one method doesn't work. 3. Match the habit to your preferences. It's important to choose a method that aligns with your personality and lifestyle. If you force yourself into something that doesn't suit you, it becomes exhausting and unsustainable. Instead of pushing yourself into habits that don't feel right, choose an approach that naturally fits into your daily life. The key takeaway is that motivation alone is never enough. If you want to make lasting changes, you must design habits in a way that works for you. Instead of relying on fleeting bursts of inspiration, create a system that keeps you on track, even when motivation runs low. Ability. Easy does it. You've probably heard the phrase, go big or go home. It implies that success requires making bold moves. But what if the key to real change wasn't about going big, but about staying consistent? Would you believe that transforming your life doesn't require drastic sacrifices, just steady progress? Many people think that life-changing decisions require extreme efforts. They assume that making a meaningful change means giving up a lot. But in reality, change doesn't have to be that difficult. Often, the real secret is starting small and sticking with it. When you focus on tiny, consistent actions, you end up gaining far more than you sacrifice. Think about a talented dancer who has mastered their craft through years of disciplined practice, or an artist who has spent countless hours perfecting their masterpiece. Their success didn't happen overnight. It was the result of small, consistent efforts over time. The only difference between them and the average person is consistency. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to stick to their plans is that they aim too high, too fast. Instead of taking small but meaningful steps, they try to make huge leaps. But rushing habits and taking big risks often backfires. More often than not, they give up before they even reach halfway. Let's look at the story of Sarika, someone who made this exact mistake. In her attempt to build a better routine, she overloaded herself with new habits, thinking it would lead to a healthier life. But instead, it had the opposite effect. Sarika had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and experienced extreme emotional highs and lows. Her doctor suggested that she incorporate more physical activity into her daily life, as exercise could help manage her stress levels. Following this advice, Sarika signed up for a yoga class and set a goal of exercising for at least 30 minutes every day. Wanting to make even bigger changes, she also decided to improve her diet. She committed to cooking healthy meals and started preparing a nutritious breakfast for herself every morning. At first, everything went smoothly. Sarika followed her schedule and even increased her workout time to 45 minutes. But as the days passed, she began feeling exhausted. The enthusiasm she had at the start was fading. She became frustrated with herself, and every time she missed a task, she felt guilty. After 3 consecutive days of failing to stick to her routine, she gave up entirely. Overwhelmed by negative emotions, she felt worse than before. Sarika's experience is a powerful reminder that when building habits, slow and steady wins the race. You can't force yourself into a completely new routine overnight. Sustainable habits require small, gradual steps. In her case, instead of trying to overhaul everything at once, a better approach would have been to start with something tiny. A simple action, like putting on her workout clothes or walking into the kitchen and turning on the light, would have been a more effective first step. At first glance, these might seem like insignificant actions, but small habits create momentum. Had Sarika simply put on her workout clothes each morning, her brain would have started associating it with exercise in a natural, effortless way. Similarly, if she had started her cooking routine by simply turning on the kitchen light, it would have encouraged her to take the next step, prepping ingredients. Tiny habits are not about achieving instant results. Their purpose is to build confidence in consistency. When you repeat small behaviors daily, they gradually become a natural part of your routine. Over time, these tiny actions shape long-lasting behaviors. The easier a habit is, the more likely you are to stick with it. To make habit formation effortless, follow these 3 steps. 1. Educate yourself. Learn as much as possible about the activity you're trying to develop. Seek professional guidance, do research, and gather information. The more you understand, the easier it becomes. 2. Prepare your resources. Often, people abandon habits not because they're difficult, but because they lack the right tools. Imagine wanting to eat healthy but not having fresh ingredients at home. The lack of resources becomes an obstacle. Setting up everything you need in advance removes unnecessary barriers. 3. Start with the absolute basics. Even if you know exactly how to do something, always begin with the smallest possible step. This trains your brain to view the habit as easy and manageable. Eventually, the action will feel so natural that you'll do it automatically. At the heart of habit building is this simple truth. Tiny actions lead to big changes. The secret to success isn't about making massive leaps. It's about starting small, staying consistent, and letting momentum do the rest. Prompts. The power of after. So far, we've explored the first 2 elements of behavior, motivation and ability. Now let's dive into the third and final element, prompts. You can think of a prompt as a trigger or cue, something that signals you to take action. Before you do anything, there is always a prompt. Without it, even if you have the motivation and ability, you may never take action. You might not be aware of it, but prompts are constantly shaping your daily life. As your day unfolds, you encounter hundreds of them, some obvious, some subtle. Prompts can either be natural or designed. For example, when a traffic light turns green, it naturally prompts you to start driving. On the other hand, a fire alarm is a designed prompt, specifically created to signal you to evacuate. Regardless of the type, the key takeaway is this: behavior follows a prompt. There are 3 types of prompts, each influencing behavior in different ways. Understanding them will help you design the right prompts for building good habits. The first type is a person-based prompt, one that comes from within your body or mind. These are internal triggers, such as feeling hungry, tired, or needing to use the restroom. They are automatic and essential for survival, but they don't help much when it comes to creating new habits. Since most personal prompts are instinctive, they aren't always reliable for habit formation. If a habit isn't tied to survival, you'll need a different type of prompt to ensure consistency. The second type is a context-based prompt, one that comes from your environment. Think about how quickly you check your phone when it vibrates, or how you wake up immediately when your alarm rings. These are external triggers that push you into action. However, context-based prompts are only effective if they happen at the right time and place. If a notification arrives when you're unable to act on it, it loses its impact. Imagine setting a reminder to water your plants, but it goes off when you're miles away from home. In that case, the prompt becomes useless because you're not in a position to take action. The third and most powerful type of prompt is an action-based prompt. This is when one behavior naturally leads to the next. Instead of relying on external reminders, you connect a new habit to something you already do. The best prompts are action-based because they don't require extra effort to remember. Instead of forcing yourself to create new triggers, you simply attach the habit to an existing routine. For example, if your goal is to floss daily instead of setting an alarm, you can make it a habit to floss immediately after brushing your teeth. Over time, brushing becomes the trigger for flossing, making the habit effortless. This technique is known as anchoring, where you use a stable, consistent routine as a foundation for new habits. Rather than trying to create motivation out of nowhere, you simply build upon something you already do. Let's take the example of Amy, who used action prompts to rebuild her life. Amy went through one of the toughest phases of her life, a painful divorce. She felt trapped in sadness, convinced that nothing good could happen to her again. But she didn't want to stay stuck in that mindset. She made a conscious decision to shift her focus and regain a sense of self-worth. Instead of making drastic changes, Amy started small. She didn't create a complicated self-help routine or overhaul her lifestyle overnight. Instead, she committed to writing one positive note about herself every morning. To make sure she stuck with it, she anchored this habit to her existing morning routine. After eating breakfast, she would sit at the kitchen table and write something positive about herself. This worked because it wasn't difficult. She already sat at the table for breakfast every morning, so adding a small habit to that routine felt effortless. Over time, writing these notes helped her see beyond her sadness and motivated her to move forward. If we look at the B equals MAP model, Amy had motivation. She wanted to heal and move past her grief. She had ability. Writing a note was a simple task she could do. Her prompt was breakfast, an action she already did every day, making it the perfect trigger for her new habit. The key to success in habit formation is finding the right prompt. When choosing an anchor, pick something stable and consistent, something that naturally fits into your routine. Remember, the strongest prompts come from habits you already have. The more seamlessly a new behavior connects to an existing one, the more effortlessly it will become part of your life. Growing your habits from tiny to transformative. We've already discussed how tiny habits are the best way to kickstart new behaviors. However, the real impact of these small habits is seen only when they grow over time. The key to lasting transformation is consistency. When you apply a habit daily, you make steady progress without even realizing it. Let's take the story of Sukumar, who discovered the power of small habits. At one point, he struggled to do even a single push-up, but today he easily completes 20 push-ups a day. For years, he had tried to become physically active, but never succeeded. However, once he adopted the tiny habits approach, he started seeing progress and gradually pushed his limits further. Sukumar didn't start by forcing himself to do 10 push-ups every morning. Instead, he attached his habit to his existing routine. After showering and getting dressed, he would do just 2 push-ups. This simple adjustment allowed him to build the habit effortlessly. After a few weeks, Sukumar began reserving time specifically for exercise. He increased his efforts step by step. Now, he spends at least 30 minutes on the treadmill and 40 minutes doing weight training at the gym. Tiny habits work because they are sustainable. They help you make progress without overwhelming you. Unlike drastic lifestyle changes, which often lead to frustration and burnout, small habits feel natural and easy to maintain. There is no time limit for reaching the full potential of a habit. The growth of a habit depends entirely on your ability and willingness to expand it. Tiny habits evolve in 2 ways. They grow. A habit becomes bigger over time. For example, if you start exercising for 10 minutes, you may eventually increase it to 30 minutes. They multiply. A habit branches out into new habits. For instance, if you start your day with morning affirmations, you might later add journaling or yoga to your routine. Each of these habits reinforces a positive cycle that improves your overall well-being. The key to expanding a habit is listening to yourself. Growth should feel natural, not forced. If you push yourself too hard, you may burn out before the habit has fully developed. Instead of forcing rapid progress, allow the habit to expand at its own pace. Self-transformation is a skill, one that requires practice. Once you understand the fundamentals of change, shifting from one behavior to another becomes effortless. When developing this skill, there are 5 key elements to keep in mind. 1. Behavior crafting. This involves deciding what to change and how to replace negative habits with positive ones. Instead of focusing only on what you want to eliminate, focus on what you want to adopt. 2. Self-assessment. Many people get influenced by what they see others doing without considering whether it truly benefits them. Self-assessment helps you identify the habits that matter most to you. When a habit is personally meaningful, you are far more likely to stick with it. 3. Processing. This is about refining your approach. Processing helps you stay true to your goals while adjusting to real-life challenges. It allows you to analyze your needs, take action, and fine-tune your habits over time. 4. Understanding. Context. Your environment shapes your behavior. If you want to change, your surroundings must support that change. Exposing yourself to positive influences makes it easier to adapt and sustain new habits. 5. Developing a positive mindset. Change starts with belief. If you resist change or cling to old habits, transformation becomes difficult. But when you approach change with an open mind, the process feels much easier. At its core, habit growth is a natural evolution. The secret is not to force change, but to allow small actions to build into something bigger, whether you want to improve your health, mindset, or productivity. The key is to start small, stay consistent, and let progress unfold over time. Conclusion. Throughout this journey, you've learned the essential building blocks of behavior. At its core, every behavior requires three key elements: motivation, ability, and a prompt. All three must be present at the same time for a habit to form. Motivation and ability balance each other, while prompts act as triggers that lead to action. Without these, building a new habit becomes almost impossible. You also explored motivation, the driving force behind your actions. However, motivation alone isn't enough to sustain long-term habits. There are three main sources of motivation: your personal desires, the results you seek, and your environment. By setting clear goals, exploring different options, and aligning habits with what works best for you, you can increase your chances of success. Next, you learned about ability, the ease with which a habit can be performed. The simpler an action is, the more likely you are to do it. Tiny habits hold the key to transformation. Instead of trying to force drastic change, start with the easiest possible step. By adopting the right skills, gathering necessary resources, and starting small, you can strengthen your ability to build sustainable habits. Then, we explored prompts, the signals that trigger behavior. Your life is full of prompts, even if you don't always notice them. Prompts come in three forms: internal, personal, external, context-based, and action-based. When designing a habit, creating an effective action-based prompt makes it much easier to follow through. Finally, you discovered how small habits evolve into big transformations. The purpose of tiny habits isn't just to create minor changes. It's to serve as the starting point for lifelong behavior shifts. To experience real change, you must learn to expand and strengthen your habits over time. The journey of transformation isn't always easy. Struggles will arise, but tiny habits significantly reduce the risk of failure. Instead of aiming for instant success, focus on consistent progress. Small victories, repeated over time, create the foundation for massive change. If you want to develop a habit, start small. You may not see immediate results, but what you will gain is far more valuable: greater ability, stronger confidence, and long-term success. And there you have it, the power of tiny habits. Change doesn't have to be overwhelming. You don't need to rely on willpower or wait for the perfect moment. By starting small, celebrating small wins, and anchoring habits to your daily routine, you can create lasting transformation, one step at a time. The real magic of tiny habits isn't just in building routines. It's in changing the way you see yourself. Every small action you take is a vote for the person you want to become. Your habits shape your identity. So, what kind of person do you want to be? Now, it's your turn. Start with something simple. Anchor it to something you already do. And most importantly, celebrate every small victory. Because small wins lead to big results. If you found this summary valuable, consider sharing it with someone who might need it. And if you want to keep learning and growing, make sure to check out our other audiobook summaries. Thank you for listening, and remember, big changes start with tiny steps.